We really are sheep. But that isn't the insult you might assume it to be. And by the end of this video, it's my goal that you'll completely understand why that is. Okay, hi. What do we know about sheep? Do we know anything about sheep or shepherds in this day and age? I don't, or rather I didn't, until I did this deep dive into Psalm 23, and my mind was literally blown. I was so inspired by learning about this that I had to make a video telling you about this psalm, one of the most well-known psalms in the Bible, but probably not terribly well understood. So let me start off by saying that calling someone a sheep has long been used as a cutting metaphor, meant to mock them for being a follower and needing comfort, needing stability, needing provision, calling them weak. But human beings of any kind, whether we're believers or atheists or something in between, each of us is capable of becoming easily lost or frightened in this very overwhelming life we live, especially during times of enormous difficulty and uncertainty. And for those like myself who do choose to trust fully in the guidance, provision, comforts, and stability that God provides, we see God as our perfect shepherd, something I'm going to explain in detail, don't worry. Much like the flock of sheep do when relying on their shepherd for their very day-to-day existence and survival. Today, it's my goal to make extremely clear why it is that God and the writers in the Bible have used imagery such as sheep and shepherd and the tools of the shepherd as the perfect illustrators for the depths of the relationship between believers and God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the whole Trinity. Whole Trinity. Never go full Trinity. Okay. And hopefully, like mine was, your mind will also be blown over the depth of information that exists in the mere 6 verses of this enormously powerful Psalm 23. Please allow me to very quickly introduce myself in case you're new here. My name is Tema, and I make videos sharing my love for watercolor painting, mostly portraits, and my love for Jesus. Okay, so back to sheep. I recently learned that humans and sheep share significant genetic similarities. Sheep, like us, are highly social, can recognize and remember human faces, and have complex cognitive abilities. They form attachments from birth, not only with their sheep moms, but with human beings from birth as well. They can recognize the face of the human, not just imprint upon the human's behavior. And much like ourselves, some of us more than others, sheep are hyper aware when something in their circle of sheep or their environment just isn't quite right. This is a lot like other prey animals, of course. They know when predators are afoot. But with sheep, it goes way deeper than this. Even when emotional strife exists between herd members, they become gravely unsettled, and their delicate nervous systems tell them that to rest at that time in any way, lie down, to even eat or drink is not smart, and they will not do so until they are calmed again, until things are sorted out, which, as you can imagine, is very detrimental to their well-being, just as it is to ours when there's strife present in our own homes, in our herd of sorts. We don't rest well or do much of anything well, and we certainly don't thrive in our lives when we are being either overtly or covertly attacked. So what can these facts about sheep, coupled with the other things I'm about to tell you about shepherds, shepherding tools, and a really messy ancient story, teach us about our modern life, our faith, and one of the best known psalms in the Bible? The background. Before we do the first reading through the psalm, I want to surprise you with some little-known information about shepherds. Shepherds are tremendous warriors. They often fight against lions and bears in the act of protecting the lives of their sheep, and they only have handheld tools to do this with. They didn't have firearms, of course. They didn't have big swords or sharp-ended things. They just had their rod and their staff, which we're going to talk about more than you ever probably wanted to in this lifetime in just a minute. Unfortunately, they're still erroneously perceived as these lithe little men, carrying out their quiet, lonely existence, passively tending to their sheep. But this is far from the reality of the life of the shepherd. And again, you may ask yourself how any of this relates to you and me today living in first world modern day life. And you know I'm going to tell you, so hang on just a second. Most of us know that the tools of the shepherd are the rod and the staff. We've all seen the staff depicted in paintings, carried by the delicate appearing berobed shepherd. But until recently, when I did this deep dive, I had no idea just how vital that particular instrument is, along with the lesser known rod, to the survival of the sheep. Not to mention how important this whole thing in terms of the imagery is to us today. The shepherd is responsible for the sheep's very existence. And conversely, the sheep are the thing or things that the shepherd cares most deeply about. Now imagine that it's only you as a human being and this herd of animals out in the wild 24/7, moving from place to place, and you can quickly see just how deep the bond between the sheep and the shepherd would be. And that was the reality for young David, the writer of Psalm 23. Psalm 23 is one of the most well-known psalms in the Bible, and if you've ever attended a funeral, you've certainly heard this read. Further, if you've stood praying at the bedside of a loved one, you've no doubt heard this psalm there. And as a hospice nurse for a few years, I heard this psalm all the time. I would hear this psalm almost daily, but this was long before I met Jesus. And while even then I felt it was a beautiful prayer, it didn't have meaning to me. I never searched it out. I did, however, memorize it because I heard it so often. And I think that's kind of interesting how it was just slowly being planted in my mind through all that daily prayer. Never really thought about that before now. Anyhow, like I said, I didn't have a clue as to the full meaning of this psalm. But as soon as I did learn about it, I had to share it with you. It has so greatly enhanced my understanding of so many other things frequently referenced in the Bible. Now, the word psalm simply means song of praise, and this particular song of praise was written by David, the second king of Israel, who reigned between 1010 and 970 BC. Now, David's life wasn't always that of a royal. In fact, David started out his life as a shepherd in Bethlehem around age 14. He was a very skilled musician and poet, and he, in fact, is the composer of many of the Psalms in the Bible. David was also the warrior who defeated the giant Goliath while still a very young man, and this act allowed him to become a national hero. During the time of his reign, he united the tribes of Israel and established Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This led to him being called the Shepherd King. David's thoughts as he wrote this psalm, however, thousands of years ago, were not in alignment with that heightened glory and those good and prosperous times. Rather, they were much more aligned with the kinds of thoughts many of us think today when facing tremendous uncertainty, deep loss, and moments where we feel lower than we have ever been before. David wrote Psalm 23 during a period in life where he was facing a terrifying set of circumstances, and he had absolutely nothing to hold on to but the trust he had built in God and with God based upon his history of trusting God from way back. Now, why do we use this term shepherd to refer to God? In just a second, we're going to talk about that and why it is that sheep and the job of the shepherd were so vital to David's understanding and trusting in God and to ours today. You see, in biblical times, people were real messy. And I mean real messy. Without having read the stories in the Bible, it's common for a lot of us to misunderstand, to assume that each story is merely a tale of these super holy people doing religious stuff all day long. But that couldn't be any further from the truth. I'm often shocked by the frequency with which I will pause in reading to say these dudes back then were way more messed up than we are today. Like, how is that even possible? This is really important to make note of because we know that God is ever the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. He will never change. And because of this, we can trust, just as David did when reflecting on his understanding of God, in God's provision for ourselves in all the ways, just as he provided for David way back to his youth. Now, it's held that Psalm 23 was written during a period called Absalom's Rebellion. Absalom was David's son, and after this whole thing transpired in their family, where David's daughter, Tamar, was actually hurt in an intimate way by David's other son and Absalom's brother Amnon. And this all caused Absalom to want to take revenge for the assault. But this really wasn't the altruistic act it might sound like, because Absalom also just really wanted to usurp the throne and kick David out. These weren't clean Bible people. These were real, gritty, and downright highly dysfunctional people that were facing things like intimate harm within the family and murder, attack, and assault, and all kinds of really gritty stuff. So if you've ever thought, well, the Bible isn't for me, I'm way too real, I'm dealing with stuff that's really serious, not this holy Bible stuff. Trust me when I say the Holy Bible stuff ain't always so holy, okay? Now, God's part in it is always holy. The people, not so much. So Absalom was after David's throne, and this forced David to flee from Jerusalem, which was the city that he had made into the capital. Like, this was his city and his throne and his son doing these things. Can you imagine? Also, he had to deal with the horror of his other son doing that to his own daughter, and then all that strife within the family as a result. His family was broken. His throne was broken. His city was taken from him. And despite Absalom stealing David's throne, David still didn't want Absalom hurt, and he had said that. However, somebody called Joab came along and killed Absalom. So David has so much more to mourn than I can even imagine. And the way that God uses both our personal experiences and our personal challenges to show us his love for us, to ensure that we truly understand the depths of it, and to express just how he's going to guide us and hold us through all this suffering. This is all evident in the history of Psalm 23, of David the shepherd king. And when we look back at just exactly how the truest shepherd, God, cares for us, his flock of very emotional, very easily worried, and easily unsettled sheep, I think you're going to begin to understand all the weightiness present within this 6-verse psalm. The rod and the staff. This leads us to the tools of the shepherd, to talking about the anatomy of the staff and its counterpart, the heavier rod, and what the shepherd uses each of these tools for, and how that relates to our relationship today with our Savior. The staff is used by the shepherd to provide the sheep with gentle guidance, to rescue and comfort them. The shepherd lifts newborns, directs the whole flock with small, gentle nudges, and frees entangled sheep from underbrush and from within the herd using this staff. The hook end of the staff is able to secure a sheep around the chest or the neck, either to pull it to safety or to bring it closer to the shepherd for whatever cares the sheep requires throughout its life. It's also used as a tool to guide the sheep into the area that the shepherd wants the sheep to converge together, thereby ensuring the flock stays close to one another. The much heavier rod can also be used for counting the sheep, something every shepherd would do at the end of the day, as the shepherd and sheep move from place to place, to ensure not a single one has gone astray, because each and every individual sheep was extremely valuable and beloved by the shepherd. Part 2, putting it all together. Now that we understand all of the backstory and details and why they all matter, let's put it together and explain the psalm line by line. Psalm 23, verse 1. The Lord is my shepherd. Obviously, this poem was written by David, who did incredible things while living the life of a shepherd, and he understands that life well. In this line, he draws the parallel between himself shepherding the sheep and God shepherding him. He knows that God is the one totally responsible for his very vulnerable life and everything within that life, just as David was totally responsible for the lives of the sheep. I shall not want. David understood that his job, the job he did as a shepherd, was not to make the sheep merely comfortable, though that may have been the case many times, but much more importantly, he was tasked with keeping the sheep alive, safe and free from harm. I shall not want is not a promise of prosperity, as sadly many unbiblical pastors and social media folks will say today. Rather, it's a promise that because the shepherd is watching over me, I'll never go without what I need. I shall not want for food. I shall not want for shelter. I shall not want for water. And those who believe are provided with these things. I might not get everything that I want, but a sense of confidence that I won't be lacking for the essentials required to keep me safe is held within this verse. If you look to the Hebrew word ra'ah, relative to shepherding and tending, this word means to pasture, feed, lead, or care for. In other words, to provide absolutely everything that the sheep could ever need. David knows this personally in that he says, I shall not want. He has experienced this already in God's provision for him. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. As we just read above, this is the ra'ah, or each of the aspects of what it means to shepherd, according to the Hebrew text. This line reflects the provision of God, mirroring the acts of the shepherd for the well-being of his sheep, just as David experienced it. 3, he leads me beside still waters. This is reflection on the ways that God, as represented by the image of the Good Shepherd, provides for the conditions of David, of us, providing us with still waters to drink from versus dangerous rushing water where we, as the sheep, could be at risk for being swept away. We talked about the heightened nervous system of the sheep and how they won't lie down, they won't eat, they won't drink, they won't relax unless there is a lack of danger. Well, the shepherd, with his rod and his staff, all comforting mechanisms for the sheep, provides the sheep with that sense of calm, regardless of what is actually going on around them. This is a really important factor here, because if we read these lines, he maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. This is God's ability to calm in a time when maybe there isn't calm to be had. This is imagery that denotes the idea that the sheep, seeing the shepherd, seeing the comforting rod, the comforting staff, are able to lie down, able to rest, able to drink, able to enjoy the green grass, because the shepherd's ever-presence comforts them no matter what, just like God comforts us no matter what. 3, he restoreth my soul. This is renewal, or God returning our whole being to its appropriate state. Like the shepherd provides peace and needed comfort to the sheep, relaxing their nervous system, allowing them to lie down and rest, to drink from the still waters, to be made fully whole. God is doing this to us as well. He is like a reset for our whole system. I've talked many times in my videos about how when I open my Bible, when I begin to read his word, even sometimes when I see the Bible from across the room, it's an automatic comfort to me, such that it shuts out a lot of the noise and the ever-present stressors of life and reminds me of the comfort that's present in his living word and in the process of me reading it and connecting with my Savior. This is a very important aspect of my life and the lives of so many of us as believers. We know that regardless of what's going on outside, in that word, in our time with God, there is peace to be had under any circumstances. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. This is further guidance. Here the paths of righteousness are the paths that he leads me down, just as the shepherd guides the sheep along safe and non-treacherous paths where they will not be at risk for falling, for becoming besmirched by the underbrush and dangers that lay along other paths, the kind we're about to get into in verse 4 of this psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. The word yea, of course, means yes. I am going to have to go through valleys where the shadow of death lingers, which can mean actual death, like this low valley I'll be traveling is the lowest and last place on earth I will walk. But it can also mean that this is a necessary valley, a place I have to walk through because it's the only way I will be able to cross over to the place I need to wind up at later. Valleys can be places we end up because of wrong turns, or they can merely be places we have to cross through in order to prepare us for our next elevation or the next great thing to come. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Here, though we are in the darkest part of the psalm, we're in the darkest part of the valley. We're not afraid because you are there with me. This references the closeness of the Lord, and the relationship is strong. And David, or we, are absolutely trusting in this closeness, in this relationship. The fear here is easily overcome simply by God's nearness. And remember what I said about the rod and the staff. We have absolute confidence in now not only God's presence with us, but also in his protection, the rod, over us, and his guidance through this dark place, the staff. These words are very clear in their meaning, and they were felt deeply by David as we know he's in this horribly dark valley of life, facing the death of his son, the death of his kingdom, and the death of other family members. This is all surrounding David. But notice we aren't talking about David's death. This isn't David's funeral. He is walking through the valley of the shadow of death, but he is not the one passing away, which is important in letting us understand that this psalm isn't only for those pending death, though it's very appropriate for that situation, but it's also very appropriate when we are experiencing death-like evils surrounding us during our deepest lows. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Here we see more provision by God, but interestingly, David references how despite the enemies still existing, as we all know, there's rarely a time in life when we have zero enemies afoot, even if the enemies are not people, but perhaps dangerous habits, old addictions, old ways of living that like to beckon us from the shadows to go back to them, right? Even in these circumstances, we are still being provided for by the Lord. Further, we're being provided for here in a manner where we're sitting here feasting and chowing down, which when one prepares a table, you have to imagine there's going to be lots of beautiful and delicious food. This isn't like I'm plunking down in front of the TV. This is somebody preparing a table for me in the presence of my enemies. We are still aware that these enemies exist and they're there and they're that close to us, but they too see us doing well, feasting, as it were, despite being in proximity, which speaks all the more to the tremendous protective qualities and the vastness of the Lord's balance in life. To me, this speaks to the fact that I don't ever have to take revenge on anyone for anything, because me living well, me living a blessed life, walking with the Lord, is enough for my enemies to see. And my ultimate hope as a believer and someone who loves my enemies, even as hard as that is to do, my ultimate hope is that them seeing me doing well because of the Lord, because of my relationship with him, might lead them to the Lord, might lead them to be curious enough about what that's about to look into who this Jesus guy is anyway, right? That's just an aside there. Back to the imagery of this psalm, we are being kept safe by God, just as the shepherd keeps the sheep, despite our enemies being that close by. And that tells us further that we can be kept safe by God at any time. God's blessings aren't halted because opposition is near. He can even bless us in large ways often while we are in the very midst of troubles. I've experienced this firsthand too many times to count. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. So in biblical times, it was a sign of honor to another to anoint their head with oil. It was also a refreshing act which a host would carry out to welcome a distinguished guest. Additionally, a shepherd would use oil to both heal a sheep's wounds and to repel insects from the body of the sheep. Therefore, David's words further symbolize the healing and protective care God has shown him over his life, and we understand this because he shows us the same today. He protects, restores, heals, and honors his children to such a great degree that he gives us so much more than we actually need. Think about it. How much more does God provide you with daily than you actually need to survive? We're talking air, water, food, shelter, basic needs of survival. And then look around you. Most all of us have abundance upon abundance more than we need to survive. And I, for one, credit God with every single thing I have in my life, along with my very life itself in more ways than one. In this, we all have such gratitude and joy because he is truly walking us through this life, through the green pastures lined by still waters, when all is good and calm and peaceful. And even when it's not, he can reflect that to us such that we can lie down, rest, drink, eat, relax, as if things were better than they are because we know he's there with us. He's there through the valleys of life when death surrounds and darkness is closing in from every direction. There's God leading us, protecting us, and providing for us every step of the way. Finally, this last verse. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. God pursues us, follows us relentlessly all of our lives. And I know this to be true because the evidence of his presence in my life was there long before I came to meet him 8 years ago. David knew this too, and he understood well God's mercy upon him. David survived this very deep valley that he was in when he wrote Psalm 23 and went on to write many more Psalms. He wrote many of the Psalms in the Bible. So this tells us that we will never be wrong to trust in God for provision in all things. But something further that David knows is that even when he comes to the end of his walk, even when the provision of lifeblood that God gives us is at its end, we will then go on to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's just the beginning of our eternity, not the end of our life, just because our life ends here on earth. Provision upon provision. There's never a time when God's provision for his children ends. That's what I want to leave you with. And also, if you made it to the end of this video, I have no words for how grateful I am, mainly because you got to hear this entire psalm and taking it apart and the full teaching. And I am so grateful for that. If you want to learn more about my story of coming to Christ 8 years ago, this is my testimony right here. Beware, it's pretty dark and dirty, so you might not love me so much while you're listening to it, but if you listen all the way to the end, I think you will find just how God provided for me through all of it. And if you want to see more art stuff, I've placed a video here for you to watch about how you can begin painting watercolor portraits even if you're brand new to watercolor or to painting portraits. I am so grateful for you being here today, and I hope that you have an absolutely beautiful day.
This big black cloud is coming